1 second.
So I can eat ice cream and lemonade and you can't yell at
It is setting up the stream onto YouTube.
Need ice.
One more person in. There we go. I think we've hit capacity. Okay, we are now on to YouTube. Pierre, you can take it away.
When's the next one?
So, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me in this live buyer's guide about buying a 107. I know that MBCA had done something like this with George Murphy a few months ago, but I think that it's always great to hear about buying a 107 from somebody who has to work on the cars regularly. And so for this buyer's guide, we're going to cover all of the 107 SL and SLC models. And these models are specifically, actually, I'm going to put my headset on because I think.
It says you eat the pink one.
Oh, you want me to use the pink one? Oh, okay. There we go. That's a little better. Can all of you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. So the R107 was introduced in 1971, towards the middle of 1971, and it replaced the 113 series SLs, which are very good cars. They're just also quite expensive to get into and quite expensive to restore. And so the 107 offers this opportunity for people to purchase a classic Mercedes convertible that's extremely reliable and durable and serviceable without having to spend $40,000 or $50,000. On the other hand, the 107 model range was so diverse and had so many different variations. You know, it was literally a car model that spanned, you know, what a normal car model would span 3 or 4 generations. And it was possible for somebody to, if you think about it in perspective, in 1971, say you were 50 years old, you could have bought a brand new 350 SL in 1971, and then 17 years later, at like the age of 67, you could have gone and bought a 560 SL, which was essentially the same platform. You know, it's just really interesting because the cars sort of span the decades of people's lives if you really look at them. So when Mercedes introduced the 107 as the 350 SL 4.5 in the United States, which was known by VIN series 107.044, it produced what I would call a Generation 1 model, which is the most pure form of the 107. And so these cars are known as 350 SLs in 1971 and 72. And then they became badged as 450 SLs for 1973. These are the quintessential chrome bumper cars. They have no emissions equipment other than a lower compression engine. They tend to be pretty good performers with around 200 horsepower. And they have a marvelous and robust engine and transmission and a very tough body. They are somewhat more rust prone than the later cars, but the 71 to 73 first generation R107 is probably the most underappreciated of the group because it's a very simple car from a maintenance and repair perspective, with one exception. That would be the D-Jetronic injection system, which we did a presentation on. And of course, sometimes dealing with some of the shortcomings that the cars had with their interiors, such as cracked dashboards or center consoles that don't fit particularly well, or interior parts that would wear out early. In 74, if you're wondering when those giant bumpers came in, 74 was the first year for the giant bumpers, and it was also the first year when Mercedes moved the battery on US cars to the trunk. The 74 to 80 cars are still part of the first generation, but I would say that they're like the second part of the first generation of R107s. Mercedes radically changed the R107 through this period of time to make it more emissions and safety compliant. So again, if you're interested in raw, pure early car, you get a 71 to 73. If you're interested in a more maybe lower cost of entry model, or a car that feels newer and has slightly better fit and finish, you might want to get, we'll say, like a 77 and later. And so in this generation, in 1974, Mercedes revised the bumpers, but they still had no emissions equipment on the exhaust system, which was nice. 75, which is arguably one of the most difficult model years for the 107, was the year Mercedes was forced to introduce exhaust emissions systems into their gasoline production engines. And so with this, the 107 gained massive thermal reactors that were bolted to the sides of the cylinder heads. The Dejetronic computer and map sensor for 1975 only were significantly revised for leaner emissions output. And there were some other critical modifications made to the front subframe bushings and things like the ignition system to make the cars hopefully more reliable. But you know, before we get too far into it, I would say if you have a 75, God bless you. If you're looking at 107s, try to avoid buying a 75 model year car, unless it's a Euro market car, which is a totally different animal. Now, the 76 models still had some emissions equipment issues. They still had the giant thermal reactors hung on the sides of the cylinder head, but they had Bosch K-Jetronic injection, which is probably the most reliable fuel injection system ever fitted to an automobile, other than diesel injection. They had mechanical valves. Hydraulic valves, which replaced the mechanical valves. So no need to do valve adjustments anymore, but you do have to pull the valve covers periodically to check the cam oiler tubes and the timing chain. But you didn't have to worry about doing it every 10,000 miles for a valve adjustment. In 77, the cars finally got an improved exhaust emission system where the catalytic converters were moved underneath the car and were fully integrated into the exhaust. These cars are probably the best cars. So if 75 is like my least recommend, 77 is one of my most recommended, because you still have the robustness of the M117 980, I think it's 986 engine or 985 engine. I can't exactly remember, but you still have the cast iron block 4.5 liter engine, K-Jetronic injection, and mechanical climate control systems. The 1978 models were continuously improved mechanically, but they had the, some people might call this a negative, but you know, for those of us that have to work in the field, it can certainly be very tough. These are the first cars that had the Chrysler sourced automatic climate control system. And this system was used on all R107s for the US market until 1981. And it was optional on on all the European cars going up to 1981 as well. So I understand that some people may have 78 to 81 450 SLs. I think if you guys would like for me to do a tutorial on this climate control system to help some of you understand it better at the end of this presentation, please leave a note about the climate control system in the comments and we can go over it. I have had some major headaches, and being the owner of a 1980 450 SLC, I have been through the climate control system labyrinth and come out the other side, and it is not easy, but you do eventually get there. The 79 models and 78 models are fairly similar. The next year that there were significant changes were in 1980, when Mercedes revised the fuel injection system with the inclusion of an oxygen sensor, and improved the final drive ratio from a 3.07 to 1 unit to a 2.665 to 1 unit. So the 1980 450 SL and SLC do get better gas mileage at the expense of some off-the-line acceleration, But thanks to the oxygen sensor and the final drive ratio for a 450, these are the most fuel efficient ones out there. I'm the proud owner of a 1980 450 SLC that was basically left for dead after its owner took it apart and never put it back together and didn't want it anymore. So, that the funny thing about that car is when I got all the fuel injection system stuff rebuilt and the timing chain and the O2 sensor working, the car was actually very nice to drive. And so for any of you that are considering which 107 might make the best daily driver, I will say that the 450 SLCs are super cars. They're extremely reliable and very tough, and they can run in regular unleaded. So 81 was a big year at Mercedes because that was the year that the 380 SL was introduced, and the 380 SL focused more on efficiency than anything else. It had a 4-speed automatic. It had the same 2.65 final drive ratio. It had an aluminum small displacement V8, 3.8 liters, and it had of course, it had an oxygen sensor, and it had some other nice things to help it get better emissions, such as a more efficient ignition system and camshafts that were set up more for torque and efficiency rather than overall horsepower. Now, this wasn't so much the case with the Euro market cars, because in Europe, Mercedes was still able to get away with making high performance cars. And we'll talk about the Euro market cars in a little bit. But 81 380 SLs and SLCs are some of the toughest cars to live with, because again, they have automatic climate control, plus that first year 3.8 liter engine had all kinds of problems that we'll discuss later in the thread. But because it was an aluminum engine, bolts that screw into aluminum don't tend to hold torque as well as bolts that screw into cast iron. So keep that in mind. But, we do have some customers that have 81 380 SLs with extensive back-breaking efforts. They tend to eventually get to a pretty good place, but I wouldn't recommend going out and buying a low mileage 81 to 83 380 SL. The most important item, which I haven't mentioned yet, is the single row timing chain that those cars used. Converting a single row chain to a double row chain is a very involved process, which we'll touch base on when we get to the major issues portion of this presentation. Now, the 380 SL gained ACC3, Automatic Climate Control 3, which was used in the 126 and 123. Finally in 1982. And this is a great system. I love it. It's wonderful. The 107 basically used it for the rest of its production life, with some minor changes that were instituted on the 560 SL. But basically the 380 SL was, from that point on, once they got some of the bugs out, a very good car. Now, Mercedes in 1983 made some key changes to the 380 SL. They revised the engine from a 116-961 engine to a 116-963 engine. The 963 engine had some improvements with its cylinder heads and pistons and bore and stroke and displacement that made it run much more smoothly, made it more efficient, and made it a nicer engine. Also, in August of 1983, keep in mind this date is very important, August of 83, Mercedes began to install the double row timing chain as factory equipment in the 380 SL. So for most of you that are looking for an efficient entry-level 107, I would say look at an 84, 85 380 SL. You can also get an 82 or 83 if you know the timing chain conversion has been done well, not sloppy, done nicely. These cars are a great buy in the $7,000 to $12,000 range. They're dependable cars. They run on regular unleaded. They get fuel economy approaching 20 miles per gallon or better. They have great air conditioning. Their fit and finish is very high, particularly on the 84 and 85. And they hold their value pretty well, meaning that you will put maintenance money into the car, but you will not take a huge bath getting one. So, you could buy one, spend about $5,000 on it, and that's your cost of entry to have a well-sorted, reliable 380 SL. And we'll say that going on 10 years, most of the time that $5,000 is still paying back on its original investment. So items that you'd have to do when you get into one of these would include things like timing chain tensioner, maybe a timing chain and upper guides, suspension bushings, subframe mount bushings, the defrost actuator for the climate control, things like belts, spark plugs, all of your fluids, nothing really major and involved if the car hasn't jumped its timing chain. Now, starting in 1986, the most popular model was released, and this was the 560 SL. And I'm going to guess that most of you on this thread, if you do already own a 107, you own a 560. The 560 SL was the car really that everybody had been waiting for this whole time, because Mercedes had sort of served these like kind of underpowered but stylish 107 cars. The 560 SL answered the needs of many Mercedes enthusiasts when they said, okay, we're not going to detune this thing. It's going to have 235 horsepower, which by all intents and purposes for Mercedes was an understatement to get insurance costs down. I think the 560 SL has a lot more power than the 235 claimed horsepower. But the 560 was built from 86 to 89. Major changes in the 560 included revisions to the lower control arms, easily replaceable lower control arm ball joints, a revised upper control arm, which instead of made of stamped steel was a cast piece. There were numerous improvements to the climate control, including a Nippon Denso rotary compressor, replacing the giant bulky Frigidaire A6 compressor that had been used on every other 107 model from 85 and earlier. The climate control was still further improved slightly with the with better data acquisition through a better external and internal temperature sensor and a modified climate control push button unit. And of course, the rear axle was a wonderful 2.47 to 1 unit, allowing for cruising at 80 plus miles an hour, barely approaching 3,000 RPM. While it does not make the 560 particularly fuel efficient, it does make it a very relaxed car to drive on the highway, much more so than some of the other models. So we're going to talk now about some of the Euro market versions, and we're going to touch on these models because it's very important that you guys know that you have options beyond what was served in the United States, particularly if you live in a state like I do where they don't really do emissions or DOT tests on classic cars. So while the 450 SL was available, the European market had the option of either a 350 SL, which is the smaller displacement M116 engine, or their own version of the 450 SL, which used a higher compression M117 engine that made 228 real horsepower. This car is a real screamer. So I would say that if you're looking for an unusual 450 SL, you want something that has the purity of the Euro bumpers and headlights, Euro 450, all the way to the end of production. What a car. The 350 SL is also a great car because it too made 200 horsepower, just like the 450 did. Although as the 450 aged, the numbers dropped until they got to about 160 horsepower in 1975 and thereafter. The 350 basically had 190 horsepower from about 1975 or 76 until the end of production. I think it was 76 when they switched to K-Jetronic on that car as well. 350 SLs tend to be a lot more basic, manual windows. Most of them did not have factory air. They all had factory power steering, but their option list was a lot more variable than the US cars, which I like. I like the manual windows. I like more basic, and that's a common theme with the Euro market cars. In 1974, Mercedes introduced what a lot of critics feel is the best model of the 107, and that was the 280 SL, the 107 044, which used the double overhead cam M110 inline 6. This engine made 185 horsepower, and from 1974 to 76, when this engine had D-Jetronic fuel injection, it feels like it might even have a little bit more. The 74 to 76 280 SLs are the most potent. They have tons of power. They are not super easy to service, but they are very reliable. And they get pretty good fuel economy. They're let down by a 3.92 to 1 axle ratio on automatic cars. And early D-Jetronic manual transmission cars had a 3.69 axle, which is a decent ratio. Now, the 350 SL and the 280 SL were available with 4-speed manual transmissions. Some of you may not know this, but this makes, particularly with the small V8 and the 350 SL, a really great driving combination. The 280 SL was available with 4-speed manuals and eventually 5-speed manuals. And the 5-speed transmission on the 280 SL was a particularly nice transmission. It yields over 20 miles per gallon easily, makes the car a very relaxed highway cruiser, but also allows you to exploit the massive power band of the twin-cam M110 engine. In fact, the M110 engine has been rumored to rev to 7,000 RPM, although
You must have hit your mute.
the World Rally for the World Rally Championship. These 5-liter SLCs were built to order and they were only available in the European market. They used an all aluminum version of the M117 engine. I think it was called the M117 960 or 961, if I remember right. And they were built as 450 SLC 5.0 between 1978 and 79. Production actually started in 77, but the 77 built cars are seen as 78s. But we'll say that Mercedes constructed these cars from 77 to 79 as 450 SLC 5.0s and as 500 SLCs with the revised 4-speed 722.3 automatic starting in 1980 and terminating towards the end of 81. These cars are real treasures, long underappreciated. They have now come into their own thanks to MBCA a long time ago had a registry dedicated to these cars that was run by Steve Gifford and Scott Sanger. Unfortunately, I think Scott did more to document these cars than anybody else, but Scott, I think it was about 14 years ago, some of you might remember, but Scott passed away suddenly from a heart attack. I think he was 58 or 59 years old, and he was like Mr. 5-liter SLC. And so they had put together a 5-liter SLC registry, and I'm proud to say that today I own one of the registry cars that I spent years tracking down. I finally found it in a shed in Merritt Island, a few miles from my house, but that's a story for another day. In 1980, Mercedes made an early release of the 380 SL and SLC. These 380s were a whole different breed of 380. They had 205 horsepower. They were fast. They were high revving little cars. I personally love these cars, and a Euro 380 is a real delight to drive. Also in 1980, Mercedes released the 500 SL. The 500 SL made use of the aluminum block technology pioneered on the counterpart SLC, and the 500 SLC was Mercedes' real performance leader with 234 horsepower and an extremely brutal 2.25 differential, allowing for relaxed cruising at 125 miles an hour. So the 500 SLC is really king of the mountain, at least in my own sentiment. Now, later on in 1986, when Mercedes began their revision of the model line in Europe, some new models were also produced. The 380 SL was replaced by the 420 SL. Very low production car, just over 1,000 units built. The 500 SL was revised to where it acquired similar characteristics to the 560 SL, but also benefited from a more aggressive ignition timing and switchable ignition, and some cars even had more aggressive camshafts. Hopefully all of you can still hear me because I'm having some bandwidth issues. I'm just
Yes, we can hear you.
okay, great, wonderful.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you so much. The other model that was introduced was the 300 SL, which replaced the 280 SL. This used the M103 inline six, coupled with all the cosmetic updates and mechanical updates pioneered in the 86 and later models. Many would argue that the 86 to 89 300 SL is probably, in terms of reliability and usability and practicality, the best of the breed, but they are also extremely rare and hard to come by. So entry price is expensive if you find a good one, and they do come up occasionally with the 5-speed manual, which is a really wonderful and desirable version of the 107. Now that we've talked about the Euro versus the US models, one thing I didn't mention in my thing here was that in 81, the SLC was phased out and was replaced by the SEC. If any of you, by the way, have any desire for a special presentation on the SLC or its replacement, the SEC, the 126 SEC, please let me know in the comments. We're going to talk about some of the fundamental differences between Euro and US models, and then we're going to discuss major issues. So the Euro versus the US models differed fundamentally in 4 ways. The first way is that the European engines were offered at a higher state of tune with more aggressive camshafts, less restrictive exhaust emissions, higher compression ratios, and more aggressive fuel delivery. These European versions were designed to be faster and more potent, while fuel economy was not necessarily sacrificed. Many of these cars made their way into the US via the gray market. Cosmetically, the cars differ because of the lights and the bumpers. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but the Euro bumpers have a very slim profile. They hug the car. They do not have any overriders. So 72 and 73 US cars have their own distinctive bumpers with little overriders, but the Euro bumpers never had overriders. They have their own distinctive flat glass pane headlights. They have their own distinctive rear valence and front spoiler. And because of this, the Euro cars have a distinct look, which I think a lot of American SL owners try to emanate. The problem is that they do this with cheap parts. So I say, if you want a Euro car, get a Euro car. You know, don't try to fake your own Euro SLC. Now, the other thing that separates the Euro cars from the US cars were that Euro cars had a la carte options, if you would like to use such a word. This meant that the buyer of the Euro market car individually selected each and every option. They were not forced to bundle options. So in the US, like in 1980, if you bought a 450 SL, you got power windows, power steering, air conditioning, automatic climate control, hard top, what else was another, what are some other examples? Bunt wheels. All this stuff came standard on US cars. You didn't have a choice. The only options that you had were whether you wanted leather, whether you wanted two-tone paint, whether or not you wanted a limited slip differential, and whether or not you wanted, let's see here, whether or not you wanted a Becker Mexico or a Becker Europa radio. That was it. Whereas in the European cars, you could choose from everything from a power antenna versus a manual antenna to whether or not you wanted ABS in 1980 or not. These option lists make the Euro cars unique, but in terms of simplicity of operation, they are really quite a boon. Many of the European cars had simplified climate control systems. The downside of this is many of them also had air conditioning retrofitted to them, and the retrofit AC systems are something that you must watch out for because a lot of them were not done to a very high standard. If you have a 107 that's a Euro market car and it has a crudely fitted sand-in compressor or York compressor with haphazard wiring and relays that look like they came from a Volkswagen with little spade connectors instead of the robust Mercedes round pin connectors, you know you're dealing with an aftermarket AC system that was designed and built by a company other than Mercedes and installed after the fact. So the fourth thing about Euro cars that I think really differentiates them from US cars is level of care. Most US cars were treated better than the European cars, and Euro cars you really have to watch out for poor federalization, including incorrect warm-up regulators, poorly installed door beam supports, exposure to road salt, which is a big problem in those cars, or cobbled together exhaust systems. It is for this reason that I say exercise more caution in buying a Euro car, but if you do the homework, the reward is usually great. Now, since we've talked about Euro versus US models, we're going to go into some major issues on the 107. There are, there are numerous major issues that the cars have that I can talk about all day, but I'm going to try to focus on the big infamous issues. So the first one was subframe failure. On 1985 and earlier cars, so any 85 and earlier 107 is suspect. The front subframes had a welded on ear where the lower control arm mounting points were fitted to the subframe. They were welded on, usually with high strength, high heat arc welding. But sometimes these welds would break or the mounting ears themselves would break, causing the control arm to separate from the subframe. And with the weight of the spring on it, of course, this would cause you to have a major accident. Or if it happens at low speeds, you end up digging a trench underneath the car. The latest car I saw this on was an 84 380 SL. The earliest car I've seen it on was a 73 450 SL. Mercedes has an ongoing recall for the subframe, but of course, in this day and age, getting a Mercedes dealer sometimes to live up to these warranty requests may require the pulling of some teeth. So aside from the subframe issues, the easiest way to deal with this problem is, one, to inspect the car and make sure that you don't have a subframe issue. Number two, check and see if you have a reinforced subframe. The reinforcement, instead of the little ear that the mounting bolt goes through being directly welded straight down from the subframe, there's also a triangular bracket that reinforces it. And it was as simple as that. The 560 SLs do not have this problem. So you could actually put a 560 SL subframe in any 107, but you do have to drill holes from underneath for the two motor mount bolts. A second major issue is the infamous timing chain that affects 81 to 83 380 SLs, but those are not the only cars that have timing chain problems. Any V8 107 is a timing chain failure suspect. These chains can and will jump, especially if they accumulate 8 or 9 degrees of stretch and the timing chain tensioner starts to fail. This can lead to bent valves, and it can lead to broken camshafts or broken timing gears. I remember when I bought my first 84 380 SL, it was a factory double row chain car, but the chain had jumped, and it was because the chain tensioner was bad. After I put a new tensioner in it, and I fixed the guides and pulled the front cover off the engine and fixed the broken distributor drive gear, I was fully invested in this car. I don't think it was really worth more than $4,000 at the time, but that exposed me to the world of broken timing chain guides. And so if you own one of these cars and you have over 60,000 miles on it, or you're hearing a rattle and at startup that goes for like a second or two, or even half a second, pull your valve covers, check for a sloppy chain or an excessively stretched chain. The best way to check your chain and see if it's stretched, grab the chain between the camshaft and the inner part of the engine and just grab it and then see if it goes really loose. And if that's the case, then your chain is worn out. It's as simple as that. No chain should have an excessive amount of slop or play in it. scientifically, the way we do this is we line up the right cam gear at top dead center, and then we look at the crankshaft gear and see how many degrees past zero we are at. If we are at 7 or 8, then it's time to start looking at a chain. If you're at 10 or 11, it's time to call your mechanic or get out your tools and replace your chain right then and there. Don't risk it because you will end up pulling heads. Now, on the aluminum block cars, pulling heads represents a very specific risk, and this feeds into our next problem, lost head bolt threads. On aluminum block cars, such as the 380, 500, 560, 420 SL, if you torque your head bolts down and then suddenly they lose torque, it's because the head bolts have pulled the threads out of the block. This means that you have to helicoil the block. And just to answer Robert's question quickly, parts for a timing chain should be around $780. Oh my gosh, this is so funny. Sorry. My wife just showed me a really funny meme. So I had to laugh at that. The typical cost of parts should be about $780, and labor should be about 8 hours if you do the upper chain rails and pull all the rockers. This is not for a quickie timing chain replacement. Anyway, going back to this, if you have problems with your head bolts holding torque, you get to pull the heads, get out a special grid, drill the head bolts bigger, and helicoil the block. A lot of the time, this operation has to happen outside the car. So, just hope and pray that you're not the person that has to deal with this. This usually happens in cars that get hot, but it was very commonplace on early aluminum block cars, particularly 81 and 82 380 SLs. Now, any 81 to 83 380 SL that has not had a timing chain conversion, getting back to the single row chain, is a $5,000 liability. You can drive the car with a single row chain, but you do need to inspect it more frequently. And, if you're like a collector, which is fine. I mean, some of us on here have multiple Mercedes, if you're a collector, you don't drive your car that often. I can understand wanting a 20,000 mile 82 380 SL, but the person who sells the car to you and the person who buys the car from you has to be fully informed that they are selling you a car that is a defective single row timing chain. Replacement of the single row chain involves, I think it's 5 steps. 5 steps. 1, pull the subframe. If you didn't hear me, yes, that is pull the subframe. 2, pull the oil pan. 3, pull all the accessories off the front of the engine. 4, pull the front timing cover. Be careful of the head gaskets. 5 steps. Pull all the cam gears in the chain. Switch everything to double row chain hardware, including camshaft sprocket, timing gear, cam gears, idler gear. All this stuff has to be done. All of it. Every bit of it. And put everything back together. Yes, it's a very involved job. So that's what you're in for if you get an 81 to 83 380 SL with a single row chain. Now, a fourth major issue, departure from mechanical problems, of course, is going to be that 78 to 81 climate control. Why is this a major issue? Well, for some people who just want to drive their car around with the top down, who cares, right? You don't care if you need AC or heat. But for those of us that want our cars to work right, such as, well, I don't know, I guess I can use myself as an example. Florida summers are insanely hot, and I have an SLC, and so I didn't want to be stuck in 95-degree heat with no air. So what I ended up doing was I ended up going through the entire climate control system and checking all the vacuum actuators and checking the climate control servo. Most of the time, the servos are bad. I'm going to say this on the record. I don't want any of you to forget it. Those aluminum body rebuilt servos? Well, they are garbage. They don't work. Buy a new one from Mercedes. They're expensive. But you can get one for about $900 if you buy the version for the 1977 to 1980 123 series cars. That is right. Buy one for a 300D or a 280E. Don't buy one for a 450 SL. What's the difference? Never figured it out. But the cheaper unit from the diesel, which is $900 versus the $2,100 unit from the for the SL and for the 116 gas cars, there's really no difference at all. the climate control tends to also suffer from some actuator issues. So a small, big issue, I'm saying small because the part is small and cheap, but it's a big issue because it causes all of your AC air to blow up at the defrost vent instead of out at you through the center vents is the defrost actuator. It's a little vacuum bulb located behind the center vents. Either the actuator leaks or the flap that it connects to inside the dash breaks and you'll have to fix it. But regardless, the defrost actuator is the #1 reason why the systems tend to malfunction. Also, if this actuator is bad and you have a car with electronic climate control, 78 to 81, the system may not even kick on because of great vacuum loss. This defrost actuator was used all the way to the end of 89, by the way, just so you're aware. Now, a fifth major issue is going to be, where do I start? I should probably touch on some stuff that you should look at if you're considering buying one of these cars. So a fifth major issue you should really be aware of is wear and tear on the top end of the engine, as in worn valve guides or blue smoke. If you were looking at a 150,000 mile or more 560 SL or 380 or 450, get the car hot, let it sit and idle for 20 minutes. Just let it sit and idle and then accelerate the engine and see if you get tons of blue smoke. This would indicate that your valve guides are worn or at least the car needs valve stem seals. So this is a good metric to determine if you have a problem with the valve guides. This can be an expensive job requiring 40 hours of labor, costing between $3,000 and $4,000 or maybe even more with the shop rates that we're seeing today. There's some other areas, of course, you should be checking on 107s for rust. These include the areas behind the headlights and the front structural rails. Water gets trapped there. The tops of the fenders behind the headlights, the fronts of the floor pans, the bulkhead where the windshield wipers mount because the wiper linkage bracket can literally rust out of the firewall. The battery trays, particularly on US cars, in the rear left part of the trunk. And of course, items like the bottoms of the doors, items such as the area around the top compartment, which, believe it or not, tends to accumulate water and rust out, and the spare tire well where water can get trapped and also create rust. So you really want to check these places for rust. Another mystery area for rust is underneath the kinder seat or underneath the rear compartment. There's a cover that you can lift off. Underneath it, there are 2 floor pans you need to check there for rust as well. Some things that we're going to transition into things that go wrong on 107. So I'm going to tell you guys about the most common repairs we have to do on 107s at Pierre Hedary's. And I'm going to get a drink of water first, by the way.
Get a scotch better.
Yeah, I don't know. Give me about Sorry, I'm thirsty. They didn't see me. I did it aside from the camera. Anyway, on most of the cars that come in the shop, we almost always inspect the timing chains. The timing chains on all of the V8 cars, I would say usually it's about 50 to 75% of cars need a timing chain when they go on the market. This includes low mileage cars. We had a 39,000 mile 380 SL that had 11 degrees of chain stretch because the car was run intermittently and nobody changed the oil in this car. It got a timing chain because it was rattling like every time you'd start it for 2 or 3 seconds. So this is probably the most common big job. And I would say most of the time with belts, spark plugs, genuine Mercedes parts. So you always want to do this with the genuine Mercedes chain tensioner, guides, Parts are usually about $1,600 to $1,800 with labor. Labor should be about 8 hours. Usually, because I'm kind of a perfectionist, we pull all the rockers out when we're rolling a chain in so we don't bend a valve. There's some guys that are real dynamos that don't change the guides. They roll the chain right in using a special chain feeder with all the rockers in place. I don't like to be sloppy about this stuff though. Now on earlier cars, there's sometimes a little bit less labor because 72 and 73 model year cars did not use plastic chain guides. So that's a big plus. Now, another common repair we have to do on 560 SLs, but not any of the others, are lower ball joints. This would apply to the 420 and 300 SL. These used a 124 part number ball joint. And this is an example of a simple job that can get to be very complicated if the shop doesn't have the right tools. So the parts for this job are under $100 using genuine Mercedes parts. I think the ball joints list for $42.50 a piece or something like that from Mercedes. If the part is cheap enough from Mercedes, buy it from Mercedes. These ball joints have a special tool where they press in and out. So it's as simple as removing the spindle with the front brakes and the rotor and everything, lifting it up, supporting it with a stand, pressing the old ball joint out using a special pressing tool that we get from Bomb Tools for about $190, and then pressing the new ball joint in from the bottom. A shop that does not have this tool, though, I could see them struggling with the job and charging 5 or 6 hours for it. So you really want to make sure that you're going to make sure that you're going to have the right shop do this. How frequent is this? Well, 9 out of 10 560 SLs need lower ball joints. The ball joint was originally designed as a part for the W201 chassis. While it does not break, its boot breaks and dirt gets in it, and it really does not have the lifespan that it should. Now, a third common repair that we see on the R107 chassis is that defrost actuator that I mentioned. This causes the air conditioning to blow upwards towards the defrost vents, and the center vents never open enough. This job only requires $50 to $60 in parts, but labor can take 2 to 3 hours if we have to take the defrost vent out and fix the defroster flap itself. However, this is a major vacuum junction because vacuum for the defrost flap also feeds the center flap. And if the center air flap can't get vacuum, it can't work. So if you have air blowing out on your dash, time to do a defrost actuator. A fourth common repair we see with AC are leaking AC compressors. The Nippon Denso or A6 compressors don't tend to break, but they do tend to leak. You can either get these compressors repaired and resealed, or you can get replacements out there. Mercedes has the A6 Frigidaire compressor in stock at the Classic Center for about $1,100. So it might make sense to learn how to remove it and reseal it yourself. Century Auto Air sells an excellent kit. They're in Arizona. They make a wonderful kit for these compressors, but there is some know-how involved in learning how to reseal one. Installation on the compressors can be quite brutal. On a 560 SL, it's a 4-hour job. On a 380 SL, it's about a 5.5-hour job. And it has to be done very carefully because you don't want to ram the compressor into the radiator, especially the big A6, which has to be removed with the bracket attached. So you remove the compressor and the bracket as one assembly and put the new compressor into the bracket on the workbench. A fifth major cause of headaches on these cars would be the steering coupler. These steering couplers require a $204 steering coupler from Mercedes, but if you have a 71 to 74 450 or 350 SL, you can rebuild the couplers with new bushings for about $11. The key with the coupler is that you have to have a centering pin for the steering box so that when you're going down the road, your wheel isn't off kilter and the wheel actually locks straight. So remember, if you're having a steering coupler done, when you're done, the car needs to do 3 things. It needs to track straight, the wheel needs to lock straight, and the turn signals need to cancel at the right intervals. Otherwise, something weird is going on, and your coupler is probably installed because it has a bunch of little splines in it, 20 degrees or 100 degrees or 80 degrees or 300 degrees off. This is a common issue because a lot of mechanics don't own the centering pin where you center the steering box, then you lock the wheel, and when you slide the coupler onto the steering box and you slide the box onto the column, everything should be lined up at dead center per the factory's requirements. A last major issue that we're going to discuss with these cars involves the shifter bushings. They're often worn out and loose, and this applies to 85 and earlier cars. This is no more than a 1.5 hour repair with one caveat. Sometimes the 4 bolts that hold the shifter housing into the body tend to rust, making them very hard to repair. But if you have a loose shifter, putting bushings on the linkage below the car will not resolve the whole thing unless you have a 560 SL, which is a different style shifter. There are 6 bushings total in the 107 shifter assembly in an automatic, 2 on the linkage and 4 in the housing. If you want perfect, crisp shifter feel, you do all 6 of the bushings. And it should take no more than 1.5 hours unless again, the bolts that hold the shifter mechanism in the tunnel seize in place. Finally, since we're getting close to about an hour here, and I want to save a lot of room for questions, we're going to mention the worst model years and the best model years of 107. So I would say that the 2 worst model years, tied for worst model year, 81 and 75. 75 because of the climate control issues, and this is only on US, because of the emissions control issues, and that's only on US cars. And 81 because of the climate control issues and some initial teething problems with the aluminum block on the 380. I would say that if you can avoid these 2 model years, unless you're getting a fully sorted, well-documented car, you know, I would just say to run. The other model years that I'd probably steer clear of just to be safe, I would not. I wouldn't be as excited to own a 78 to 80 450 SL or SLC as I would a 77. The 77, because of its climate control, is a more desirable car. However, if you find a 78 to 80 that you really like with the factory climate control books and a lot of patience, you can get them to work. But I think that the 78 to 80 450 really suffers again because of the climate control. Now, in terms of 560 SLs, I know some of you are saying, oh, well, you should probably look for an 88 or 89, but really all 560 SLs are good, whether it's an 86, 87, 88, or 89. All 4 model years are good. There was never really a bad version of the 560 SL. This is a good consideration, by the way. One of our viewers said, I'm 6'1", will I feel comfortable in an R107 given my height? So believe it or not, I'm 6'4". I barely fit, but I do feel okay in a 107 because there's an adjustment for the back of the seat that you can use to raise and lower the seat up and down. This adjustment was used starting in 77 or 78, and then it was improved in 1981 so that you can pivot your seat back up and down. But I think when you get over 6 feet tall, the cars do feel a little bit cramped, especially going in and out. Probably the best models of these cars, I would say that the 77 450 SL gets high marks. The 84 and 85 380 SL get high marks. All of the European cars are great cars. The best of which is probably the 280 SL or 300 SL with a manual. And of course the 560 SL if you really feel like you have to have the latest and best of everything with ABS and airbags and all of that good stuff. The 560 SL really is great value for the money. If you think about it, the 560 SL has all of the attributes that a lot of foreign GT cars had at the time, but you could purchase it today for a fraction of the price and maintain it for the fraction of the price of an Aston Martin or a Jaguar XJS convertible or something ridiculous like a Porsche 968 Cabriolet or, similar cars. Last, we're going to talk about, of course, values, because I know that this is a buyer's guide, so we should be cognizant of what the right car should cost. a really good first gen 71 to 73 450 SL or 350 SL is a $10,000 to $15,000 car. Unless you have an exceptionally low mileage, well documented car, I probably would not go over 15, 16,000 for one of these. These cars, as graceful and beautiful as they are, they struggle in the marketplace again because of fit and finish issues, and because D-Jetronic injection is a very poorly understood injection system by most mechanics. The system actually is tough and reliable, but you have to be willing and able to troubleshoot some of the issues yourself. Once you troubleshoot them, they generally stay gone. The 1974 model year cars also struggle a little bit in the marketplace. I'd say that they're $10,000 to $12,000 cars. 75 model year cars, you really have to be a sucker for pain, but even the best 75 model year car is going to be a tough sell. I remember that Classic sold one of these cars to one of my customers after they converted the exhaust system to a 1977 system. It is possible. So if you own a 75 and you want to deal with the exhaust issues, consider putting an entire 77 system on from manifolds all the way back to exhaust, and that will alleviate the majority of its issues. But 75, I would say just look for another car. The 76 and 77 cars, again, we're back in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. 78 to 80 cars, despite the fact that I dislike the climate control system, they may pull a little bit more. So really nice 450 SLs from that era, you might start to see $17,000, $18,000, $19,000, $20,000. With 380 SLs, there are a number of ultra low mileage 81 to 83 380 SLs out there. Even if you showed up at my door with a 16,000 mile 380 SL, I'd say, I'm almost done. The 81 to 83 380 SL with a single row timing chain is approximately a $20,000 to $25,000 car. If you're looking for a nice daily driver 380, you should be able to buy one for $7,500 to $10,000. It's even possible sometimes to buy, like, I'm not going to call it an ugly car, but like a Manila beige on Palomino MB-Tex car for $6,500 that's had good maintenance and has higher mileage, 140, 150,000 miles. It's still a decent car that you can use regularly and really enjoy. So if you're not married to color, you can generally get a great deal on a 380, even a late 380. Huh.
That's going to be the next topic.
Oh, are you going to do that?
No, the lady already did it.
For MBCA. Okay, so next we have 560 SL. The 560 SLs tend to be in a league of their own. And one of the reasons that this is because the 560 SL really was an outstanding car. I mean, it took the status of the 107 and really catapulted it into another dimension. So you can get into a decent driver 560 for around $10,000 if it has over 100,000 miles. Once you start getting into lower mileage cars, 50, 60,000 mile cars, you're going to start seeing numbers pop up in the low to mid 20s. These sort of low to mid $20,000 trends continue till you get to about the 50,000 mile range. Then you start seeing cars in the low to mid 30s. And then suddenly things take a huge turn upward when you get to 40,000 mile, 30,000 mile cars. You start seeing values in the high 30s, 40s, 50s. If you have a car that's got below 10,000 original miles, it could be worth anywhere from $70,000 to $95,000 depending on the colors and the year. So people really like 560 SLs, and 500 SLs are probably the most valuable ones of the bunch. 500 SL values also have their own curve in the market. They start out in the $5,000 range for like a rusty tired project. going all the way to the $110,000 range or $120,000 range for a low mileage 89 late production 500 SL. Here's a funny story that I would like to share with you guys. Okay, Elaine, well, I still, excuse me for 1 second. The 500 SL that I was first exposed to, that was a super low mileage car, sold on Bring a Trailer back in 2017 for $55,000. It was an 8,000 mile 85. We did about $8,000 worth of sorting on this car, including fitting a factory exhaust system, converting the AC back to R12, removing a bunch of US emissions equipment that was put on the car. So really we were purifying the car. And of course that factory exhaust was quite expensive. But when we delivered this car back to its new owner, he hung on to it for a couple months, but then he got this mysterious call from a collector in Germany who offered him $85,000 for this Gen 1 pristine red on Palomino 500 SL. And he had seen the car sell and Bring a Trailer and had been trying to find it. And so the fascinating culmination of this was that if you have a 500 SL, these cars really seem to be a hot commodity, particularly because of European buyers. Some other SL values of note: manual transmission, particularly 5-speed 280 SLs, $20,000 to $25,000. 500 SLCs or 450 SLC 5.0s. Minimum entry price now for a project is like 12 grand. If you want a good car, you're going to pay 20 to 35. 86 to 89 300 SLs. These cars are basically the same values as a 560 SL. So something to make a note of. And probably the least expensive, I would say, if you want a decent 107, the least expensive car you can get into, other than an SLC, is probably a 77 450 SL, including cost of maintenance, or an 82, 83, 380 SL with high mileage, but a double row chain conversion. So if you want low cost of entry, it's going to be 380 SL all the way. Okay, now let's open the floor up for questions since it's 9:06 and I've gone for about an hour. Anne-Marie, let the questions begin.
Okay, let's go through our questions. The first one is from Cal. In the 560 series, are there any major good or bad aspects between the 86 to 89?
I figured somebody was going to ask that question, and really there isn't. I think the 88 to 89 is purely market perception. So I'd say no. I'd say with 107s, really don't get caught up in the 88, 89 versus 86 and 87 hype. The cars are so similar throughout their production range that nobody will know the difference. And you can actually get a pretty good value for the money if you find an 86 or 87 car, particularly because they tend to get overlooked in favor of 88 and 89 cars.
Okay, our next question is for an 85 110.990 engine with Lambda, frequency valve and O2 sensor still installed and apparently working. Full exhaust has been replaced with a factory NOS system. Would performance be improved if the frequency valve, etc., were removed? Emissions is not a factor in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I would just say remove all that junk because it never works right. I don't know if you'd see a huge performance gain, but it would certainly simplify the car. And that's what we do for every 380. A lot of this aftermarket stuff that's been added on, sometimes they even change warm-up regulators, which is something you need to ascertain. If you want to know if you have the right warm-up regulator, you can call CIS Flowtech in Alabama, and they will verify this for you. Their number is 251-929-3771. A lot of the time, there is always a hidden boogaboo with this stuff that tends to make the car run better or start better. But it's hard to say without seeing the individual car. But if emissions are not an issue, I'd remove it because, it was just there to satisfy a guy in the DOT office saying, okay, you installed all this crap, car's good to go. Next.
Okay, the next question is from 1989 560 SL owner. Regarding the Euro models, what is your thought on converting a big bumper US model to Euro chrome bumpers? There are kits available to do this. Looks like you only have to drill a couple holes, so it's likely reversible. Perhaps safety is sacrificed some. You mentioned the kits use cheaper parts. Thanks for your helpful info.
I just don't like doing it. I think a Euro car is a Euro car, US car is a US car. I think you just have to accept the car for what it is. I think there are enough Euro cars out there where if you want one, you can buy one. Personally, if I had to choose between like a 560 or 380 SL that had crappy aftermarket Euro bumpers or factory US bumpers, I would want to know that if somebody rear ends me, that person is going to have to not only pay for my US bumper shocks, but is going to have to pay for a new hood and grill and radiator and condenser and all, a bunch of other stuff for their car or small SUV. But I also think that the US bumpers offer increased safety, and that's a huge plus for them. Oftentimes we get caught up in looks, but those bumpers do work. So anyway, let's go to the next question.
Next one is from Glenn. My 88 560 has 200,000 miles. Is it due for a second timing chain?
You should check the chain stretch. If you have more than 8 degrees of stretch, yes. If you don't, then don't worry about it. But I would say just on average, probably, like it's something you should be investigating, to say the least. Okay, next question.
Next question is from Igor. How do you rate 6 versus 8 cylinder in terms of durability?
I would say that both of the engines are pretty durable. They're probably about the same. I would say that the 450 engine, the 4.5 liter M117.98 engines are probably the toughest ones. The M110 is a good engine. It's an extremely good engine. It's probably better than let's say an early 380 engine. But the thing I have to emphasize is that all the engines used in the 107s were good engines. And that's what makes these cars so wonderful compared to I don't know, some of the other cars from some of the competition. So they're, it's really just a matter of preference.
Okay, next question is from Cal. If an 86 560 only has 40,000 miles on it, should the ball joints be fine?
No, they're probably not. We've seen them bad on 20,000 mile cars from nice climates. So you should expect them. If the boots are broken, the ball joints are bad.
Okay, next question is from Delvis. Did any R107 SLs come with rear seats?
Yeah, the Euro market cars had the optional kinder seat available. On US cars, the DOT would never allow this, but there were Euro cars that had it, and there were kits available so that you can install it. Personally, I think that the rear seat on the 107 is not very effective. I've tried it out before. Not a good fit for somebody my size.
Next question is from Matt. Where should the temp gauge read on an 86 560? Seems to be in the right range, but there's always a hot smell coming from the area in the front end of the engine on the driver's side by the power steering pump.
Okay, this is a great question, actually. So sitting in traffic, you're allowed to see up to 100 Celsius. When you're going down the road, it should be like 80, 81, 82, 83 Celsius. You shouldn't really see much above the 80. And if you're idling in traffic with the AC on, you shouldn't see much above 100. If you're getting above 100, then your auxiliary fan resistor might be bad, which is located right by the AC dryer. It's a little ceramic resistor on the right side, passenger side by the AC dryer. Or your fan clutch may be low on silicone oil. And you can actually, instead of putting on a Chinese fan clutch, you could actually inject 10,000 CST silicone oil into your factory fan clutch and get it to engage.
Okay, next question is from Donald. 280 SL, 1983. What's the value on that? Do you consider it a good or a bad car?
Well, I don't know how recently his question came in, but I think the 280 SL is a great car. It's wonderful, really. It's a shame Mercedes didn't offer it here, but a lot of people brought them in. If it's an automatic transmission car, the value is probably around 15. If it's a manual car, the value is probably around 25, but this can vary a lot with options. So if you have a car with factory AC versus an aftermarket system, that's going to add some value. If you have a car that has that's structurally good and has a nice dash, a nice original interior and leather and some other sumptuous options, that's also going to help. But automatic 280 SLs, especially with lower mileage, $15,000, $16,000, $17,000.
Okay, next is from Ozcan. Do you recommend ethanol-free gas for any of the 107s?
Yeah, I do. I recommend it really for all of them. The up to 85, all the US cars could be run on regular gas, so you can use any pump grade rec fuel in them. After 89, things get a little bit more complicated, but I prefer ethanol free gas because it preserves the fuel distributors and also keeps the fuel tank from accumulating moisture, which rusty fuel tanks are a big problem in these cars when they sit for extended periods of time. So what I would probably say is that use ethanol free, especially if you're storing the car for a long time. If you have a 560, 90 octane is good enough. The car will not ping on 90 octane. So ethanol free though, whenever it's available.
Okay, next is from Wally. On a 560 SL, what is the approximate cost to rebuild the torque converter? At what mileage should this be necessary?
Oh my gosh. This is
Prices
first of
are
all,
hard.
yeah.
It depends on where you are. What's your market? What are labor rates?
Yeah, no. First of all, I've never had a torque converter fail in one of these cars. Like they're done as a precautionary rebuild with the transmission, but honestly, I would say don't worry about it. If you have a transmission issue, then they're usually included with the transmission rebuild. Sun Valley will sell you a rebuilt trans and torque converter for $1,500. They take about 8 hours to exchange. But the torque converters, I've never had a problem with one. I don't know if somebody has had an issue with one of these, I wonder what terrible thing happened to cause it, because it doesn't happen on its own. Okay, next question.
Next question is from Cal. Is there a way to get a Monroney type printout on these older SLs to see what options were ordered, aka limited slip diffs?
I know what he's asking about. He's asking about a data card. If you call Mercedes Classic Center and request a data card for $150, you'll be able to get the data card that has all of your car's original options. Of course, it's delivery colors and its engine number and transmission number, and it's some other bizarre info like the type of tires it was delivered with. But yes, Mercedes keeps a data card on most 107 cars. Now, there's an exception to this. Some of the European cars do not have data cards. So my 107 SLC, my 1979 450 SLC 50, no record of this car exists within Mercedes, and this can be really frustrating. But for all the US cars, yes, you can get a data card. All right, next question, and thank you, Anne-Marie.
Next question is from Neil. Have a 560 Euro SEC and would really like you to do a show on the SECs.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. I just need 9 more of you.
We will put it on the list. And after that, we have
People
Carmen.
who want an SEC presentation.
Carmen's question: what are issues with blue smoke and white smoke?
Oh boy. Okay, blue smoke means you're burning oil, usually through valve guides or valve stem seals. If you have a lower mileage car, like under 120,000 miles, replace your valve stem seals. It's probably not a loose guide. White smoke can be all kinds of things. So if you start the car up and it's been sitting for a long time and there's condensate in the exhaust, you're going to get a ton of white smoke. If you've overheated the car badly, really badly, gotten it hot, you're going to get white smoke from leaking coolant. But white smoke generally only appears as a product of exhaust condensation, especially in cars that spend a lot of time sitting. And blue smoke is typically after the car sits and idles for a long time when it's hot. So blue smoke at later stages, if there's a lot of it and you're burning oil with it, it may mean you have a loose valve guide, which means it's time to pull cylinder heads. Lots of fun.
Next question is not really a question, it's a comment from Anton. Saw your video on the EHA valve adjustment and it saved him $2,000. Many thanks.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I think a lot of people in MBCA are starting to hopefully realize how much value these presentations have. And we covered the EHA in our KE Jetronic presentation. So, you know, I get such low turnout for the presentations and the technical stuff. I don't understand why I have 100 people in a buyer's guide and like 30 people actually want to learn how the car works. I should have 100 people wanting to learn how the car works and 50 people in the buyer's guide session, you know? So, you know, in the future, I'd appreciate higher turnout in the mechanical stuff, because you do get stories like this occasionally where somebody follows a little tiny piece of advice in the presentation and ends up saving 10 hours of labor or thousands of dollars. So it's just a good reason to make time, maybe go and rewatch the presentations and fuel systems, particularly on the MBCA events and member resources page. All right, next question.
Next question is from Neil. 560 SL has a fuel problem. It will either not start, or it starts then quits a couple of miles down the road. If it stalls, you have to wait 10 minutes before it will restart.
You probably have a bad fuel pump relay. It's located behind your glove box insert. It's going to say KPR on the top. Now, as far as where you can get a fuel pump relay, I hate to tell you this, but you're going to have to punch the numbers into eBay and look for a new old stock unit, or contact Beckman Technologies for a properly rebuilt unit. There are also some tutorials on Bin's World about rebuilding these. I really try to avoid getting Euro parts or Kaler, KAE relays. They're not very good, but in a pinch, you can use a Kaler relay, and yes, you can use a decent used relay from Mercedes. So, but it's probably your fuel pump relay. This is the single most common reliability impediment.
Next question is from David. Can you mention issues with the alarm systems on the 560 SL? Usually these are best if disconnected. Question?
Yeah, he's right about that too. I mean, the 560 SLs and 85 model year 380 SLs have alarm systems that go crazy, especially when it gets wet out. The alarm can be found behind the glove box insert, mounted on one of the HVAC tubes. There are two plugs for it. You can easily disconnect it and the alarm won't go bam, bam, bam and turn the auxiliary horn on. But anyway, these alarms are kind of a known pain. I only disconnect them though when they start to act up. Next question.
Next question is from Alan. What is a better R107 for driving on tours? An early one, 71 to 73, or later cars?
Oh boy, a great question from one of my favorite people. Thank you for your question, Alan. And thank you for all the hard work you've done in the, you know, with Legends. I really admire your input. So I think that with 107s and tours, it's really the car that you like, the car that you feel like you could depend on the most. I don't know. I guess it really depends on the driving tour as well. So for long driving tours, if you want more levels of creature comfort and better safety, obviously a 560 SL. But if you're on a tour where you're kind of cached with a bunch of older cars, like some driving tours are limited to 72 and earlier cars. There's nothing wrong with taking a 72, 73, 450 SL on a tour. Yeah, you're going to have to stop for gas a lot, but you're going to have a pretty good fun time, and you're probably going to have fewer problems than anybody else on the tour. But generally, all 107s make great tour cars.
Next question is another one from 1989 560 SL owner. What is involved in converting these cars from R12 Freon to R134?
Wow, that's a great question. So first of all, I wouldn't convert to R134. I'd use a drop-in R12 replacement like EnviroSafe or Freeze 12 or something like that. If somebody insists on converting it to R134, I would say remove the compressor, change the oil in it to modern ND8 oil. Mercedes does have a part number for it. So ND8 is Nippon Denso's own version of PAG oil. Modern ND8, believe it or not, is the only oil. It's not an ester and it's not a true PAG oil. It's the only compressor oil that I know of that is both R12 and R134 compatible. You have to flush the system thoroughly, change the AC dryer, and then you're free to put R134 in. If you opt for changing an expansion valve, it is a pain in the butt. You probably won't have to do it because even the R12 valves will work with R134. So, just so you know, some of the time they'll label a valve R134A or something like that. Really, the valves are compatible either way.
Next question is from Bruce and Lisa. If I remove the now unavailable frequency valve on a 380 SL, do I block the fuel flow or just remove the valve and patch with bypass hardline?
Oh boy.
Oh, Pierre, you froze. Hold on a sec.
Frequency valve failure is also very low, but what the frequency valve does is it trims the mixture so that you end up with a leaner mixture when you're under load. So obviously deleting the frequency valve would be the kind of the way to go, but I don't know if I do that. You may need a good hydraulic shop to press a new rubber hose connector onto your frequency valve, but deleting the frequency valve is not a common or accepted practice on US cars. And while it is possible, I've never run into a scenario where I had to delete it.
And next question is from Brandon. 90 octane is not available in his area. Is 89 okay?
Yeah, you just use octane boost. That's all. Next question.
Okay, it's from Mitchell. He wants to know if there's a build sheet with info under the spare tire.
No, not usually. There's a comment in the thread about how sometimes they were glued to the underside of how they glued like a partial data card to the top of the fuel tank or in that compartment. But the data card was usually included with the car's books when it was new. Sometimes you'll find some build data throughout the car. These are line tickets that were installed as the car was progressing through the assembly line so that people knew, what interior color it had or what was supposed to go where, like what kind of tire was supposed to go in the trunk. But these are not true data cards. And you're unlikely to find anything like that in a spare tire well, unless you get really lucky.
And our last question is from Robert. I have an 88 560 SL with 65,000 miles, one owner before him, drives well, no noises, no apparent issues. What should it cost me to have a qualified person evaluate the timing chain and the ball joints?
Oh boy. I guess it depends on what market you're in. So you can evaluate your own ball joints. You just have to crawl under the car and look and see if the ball joints are broken, if the boots are broken. As far as the timing chain goes, that's a very good question. So you should start to have it evaluated at 65,000 miles. I would probably want to find a person who was familiar with these cars who could say, okay, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 customer referrals that also have 107s or 126s or 124s. In this case, you want to find a person where you know that other people can vouch for their ability to do a proper inspection. And you want the person to actually show you and explain to you where the issue is, if there's an issue, or if there isn't an issue, be able to identify it. I'm always wary with low mileage cars of guys that say, oh, we're just going to replace the timing chain to be done with it. You know, that's not a good approach to have. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
And we got one more question from David. Does MB sell replacement owner's manuals for the 560 SL?
They do, yeah. If you contact Classic Center, they should be able to provide you with a black and white reprint.
Okay. That is it for the questions. Do you have any final thoughts, Pierre?
When is their next presentation?
I was going to tell everybody that our next presentation is on January 21st. It is the buyer's guide to the 108 and the 109.
This is going to be really special. So, you know, I hope to see if you have friends in MBCA that were curious about these cars. You know, I'm really going to try to make it a great buyer's guide and go really in depth. So, you know, and then after that, things are going to get interesting because Elaine and I have a baby on the way. So,
you are going to have no time whatsoever.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I just say that, you know, yeah, babies come when they want. So things are going to be interesting. I just hope that there are going to be some more people that are willing to sort of take up the load to do some of these presentations, because I think that they add a lot of value to MBCA. So anyway, I appreciate all of you joining us, because, you know, it really makes us feel here at the Social Media Committee like we're making a positive impact in the ownership, preservation, and maintenance of classic Mercedes, and of course, helping people get good information so that they can come into classic Mercedes ownership with the feeling that they're buying a good car, not with a bunch of questions about whether they bought a lemon or not. So, you know, that, you know, I hope each and every one of you gets to enjoy classic Mercedes ownership.
Thank you so much, everybody, and a special thank you to Pierre for donating so much of his valuable time doing these presentations.
And thank you, Anne Marie. Without you, we couldn't do it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Pierre. Thanks.
You know, she dresses up just for these presentations.
I do dress up just for these presentations.
Yeah.
I've been working from home for 11 months, and this is literally the only time I put work appropriate clothes on. The rest is just workout clothes and yoga pants. So it gives me an excuse to dress up a little bit and to chat with all of you lovely MBCA people. As we said earlier, our next presentation is on January 21st on the 108 and 109 buyer's guide. If you have anybody, like Pierre says, we do need more people to do these presentations, so it's not all on Pierre's shoulders. If you know somebody who would be able to do that, please contact us. Our email is socialmedia@mbca.org, and our chairman, Andrew, receives all those emails and he'll forward it to the appropriate person. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback on this presentation or any of our past presentations, you can also email us. Again, that's socialmedia@mbca.org. And we have, this has been live streamed onto our YouTube channel, which is MBCA-events and member resources, where all of our prior presentations, buyer's guide, tech sessions, and all of that are also on. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful night and see you on the next presentation.